Well, Jim, speaking of a good night's sleep, once again, and this has happened several times recently, Vince McMahon and WWE have sent several wrestlers to sleep with the fishes. How's that for a transition?
That's terrible. That's terrible. I love it. I saw somebody tweeted a mock-up of the normal tweet from when WWE says we release so-and-so. They said the WWE has come to terms on the release of the WWE Universe. And then WWE Universe is All Elite. And oh my God. And then somebody tweeted another mock-up of a WWE tweet. I'm the only one left. Vince and Nick Khan are roaming the halls looking for people. I'm under a desk. Please help.
Signed Hunter.
Yeah. Do you have the list of the latest releases? Because there were a few surprises on this one too.
I'm pulling up the list right now. I know the biggest names, but I want to make sure I get the complete list.
Yes.
They were all, well, I shouldn't say they were all, but a lot of them were really surprises. But here is the list.
I've got to plug a hole in my grade 8 now that I had picked out of their roster.
Here is the list of the names that were released. Again, all of them NXT. Bobby Fish, Bronson Reed, Jake Atlas, Ari Sterling, Kona Reeves, Leon Ruff, Stefan Smith. I think that's how you would pronounce that based on the spelling here. I don't know who that is. Tyler Rust, Zechariah Smith, which raises the question. They had someone on the roster with a name Zachary Smith, but anyway.
Dr. Zachary Smith was on the roster.
Asher Hale.
I wondered what happened to Jonathan Harris if
But again, Zechariah Smith, Asher Hale, Grant Zangier, and finally Mercedes Martinez.
Well, and that surprises, well, it doesn't surprise me because she's just a competent, quality wrestler. Obviously, I didn't want to see Bobby Fish go anywhere because he's talented also, but I can understand the age factor because Bobby is older than his incredibly athletic looks would have you believe. So I could kind of justify that in some way, but Bronson Reed, and as I mentioned, I look at people as if what I believe they could do and what I might do with them rather than what they're doing right now. And I've said that this guy, he's a likable guy. When he spoke, did one of those backstage interviews that wasn't overly scripted for him and just allowed him to speak a little bit. He's a pleasant guy, but that size and the way that he can move around and the shit that he could do. And I even like the little camera, the little entrance skit they did with the camera when he would put the foot on the bottom stair and boom. And it's like, but in all honesty, they've just let him be floundering around being another fucking guy that's glad to be there. That's the way he's been presented is, oh, I'm so glad I've achieved my dream. Remember when I said this guy looks younger than he is? Why are they saying he's been at this for 14 years?
Yeah.
That tells people, wait a minute, he's got to be in his 30s and he hasn't made it so far. That's a detriment. And then they go out and instead of giving this guy some type of gimmick that people would like, that would make him a likable, enjoyable person to be around, that then when you piss him off, because he's a babyface, when you piss him off, watch out, he'll fucking lay waste to people. But he's a jovial fellow, but something interesting instead of just, this has always been my dream, like 18 million other people that they've had say this. And I'm so lucky to be here. And oh, by the way, I've been trying to do this for 14 years. The average person working at a fucking gas station in Des Moines has not followed this guy since he was a teenager in Australia or New Zealand or, the Isle of Man or wherever the fuck he's from, right? So,
the other thing too is I'm trying to think back to when I was a kid watching wrestling. I never knew anyone's age. I never had any idea how old anyone was.
They all looked a great deal older because they looked like grown adults, but you really, it was mixed. There were younger guys that looked badass, and there was older guys that looked badass, and there was occasionally some younger guys that looked young, and that's what drew all the women. But so anyway, I think that Bronson Reed could have, if they'd have debuted him as a prodigy from somewhere unknown and made him a splash, so to speak, and gave him some kind of fun personality or some reason for people to want to like him instead of just he's achieving his dream, because that's gotten way past old. Then, but they've said Vince and, well, who went on the scouting trip? Vince and Bruce and
Laurinaitis
and Johnny Ace. They want younger guys and bigger guys that can be main event stars, and that's what they want out of NXT. And imagine that. And I will say that they will go too far with the bigger guys and not give some smaller guys a chance. But why would you not want guys of some charisma that can be stars and look a certain way instead of just interchangeable guys of all the same small size doing the same kind of small shit? So I agree with, I'm not saying that they will use these parameters in the best fashion, and a rule of thumb, there's always needs to be an exception to the rule. If you see Bobby Lashley right now, he's in his 40s. You say, nope, he's too old. No, you say, okay, he's a fucking freak, so never mind. But there's always an exception, but for the most part, they do need grown adult men that have the physical charisma to be main event stars, as well as guys that can work or be taught to work. And what have I been saying for the past, wait a minute, do you have the rooster? Do we even need the rooster?
I could find the rooster.
Well, I know you love to look for the rooster, but what have I been saying for the past couple of years since we've been clap for the rooster? He's going to rate your record high. Anyway, what have I been saying for the last couple of years? If Vince walked in and saw Johnny Sameface as the leading man of NXT, he'd drug test everybody. Because I used to catch shit from Laurinaitis in OVW for featuring guys that weren't on contract because they were outworking the guys that they had signed. Well, there you go. You love it. You love it.
It's so stupid. All right, I'm going to stop this right now. But anyway.
All right. But anyway, I used to get shit all the time from Laurinaitis about using guys that were not on contract, even though they were outperforming some of the guys that were on contract, because I wanted my show to be the best that it could be. But if I had gone as far as, and a couple of them, two guys named Seth Skyfire and Mac Johnson, they were both painfully thin, and Skyfire was short, but they were exciting and they could work, and the fans liked them, and they didn't give them a contract, but I had them in my tag team mix because they could work with all my other teams. And did I mention the fans liked them? And they still looked like athletes. But and right now they would probably dwarf 30% of the AEW roster. But the point is, if Vince McMahon himself had come to OVW and saw that not only had they signed these guys, but that I was building the entire company around them when they were never, ever going to get called up to the main roster or main event WrestleMania, his head would have exploded. And I'm sure that's what happened. He looked and he said, there's some people here we can work with, and there's a lot of similar guys of similar size that are not impressive and people we can market. And, you know, and sometimes just the way it is sometimes. Everybody can't do this. You've got a music background. How many times has a record company found some guy that could sing his ass off, but he looked like Ned, like a fucking guy working at the Jiffy Lube, and had no charisma, and you couldn't package him, and you couldn't put his picture on an album cover?
It happened a lot. And, after MTV, you didn't really see rock stars with blood boils anymore.
Oh, my God. And after MTV, you didn't even see Billy Squier anymore, for fuck's sake.
Well, he did that to himself, to be fair.
Well, no, the director of the video did it, too.
Yeah, Kenny Ortega. I agree with you on that. Hey, I want to ask you a question on this topic, but let me read you a quote because I thought it was interesting. Dave Meltzer the other day had a quote. This was from a WWE source on this whole NXT thing. And he said, the quote was, "No more midgets, no one starting in their 30s. They want people who can be box office attractions and main characters." And to that quote, and to everything we talked about, my question, does it sound to you like Vince wants OVW?
Well, he's lost out on that because both of the principals are retired. Danny Davis in beautiful Florida and myself in muggy Kentucky.
And I realize that's the realities of it, but I'm just talking about that kind of system. I mean, that was the system that churned out the main event stars for a generation. And since that time, I mean, recently you brought up how he would go there and see these guys and say, oh my God, Johnny Gargano, I can't even imagine. Damian Priest went up there. Damian Priest is one of those guys that we both looked at, especially you, and you said, This guy, he has something. Vince is going to see it. There aren't that many guys there. Damian Priest is the kind of guy that would have fit into OVW in my eyes.
And I guess he must be on Raw because we are not seeing him, and that's the only thing we haven't been keeping an eye on lately. But yeah, I would have loved to have Damian Priest in OVW because he has a deep voice. It sounds like a grown adult man. He delivers his lines in an assured and confident, natural fashion. He looks like a professional athlete, and he could work. He's not goddamn, I'm trying to think of Bryan Danielson, somebody that people today would identify as a technical genius, but he can work, and he's got size, and he's got a look, and he can talk. So, of course, you use guys like that. If you have a bunch of guys, as I've said, that are similar to each other and do similar things and are similar in size, that doesn't stand out. That doesn't work. Wrestling has been likened to a carnival, to a zoo, or a wrestling roster, rather, a carnival or a zoo, or they used to say, when I first got to the WWF, well, the WWF is the land of fruits and nuts, and Vince is the head cashew. But it's got to be the cowboy and the Indian and the giant and the singer and the fucking everybody different and stand out and have their own personalities and do different shit. And between the Performance Center training, a lot of people do the same shit, and also the guys naturally doing the same shit as each other because they're all working together. The territory system of training was preferable, obviously. I don't think anybody says that the Performance Center or even OVW trained anybody like the territory system did. That'd just be crazy to say that, because guys that were just getting in the business or had been in the business 2 years or 3 years were not only working with in the ring, but sitting in the locker room with and riding in the cars with guys that had been in the business for 10 or 20 or 30 years, and they had learned different styles and different things and had different gimmicks and different philosophies within the same parameter of this is what wrestling is. And you learned all that shit. And every territory had a different style and a different flavor and a different method of promoting or booking or whatever. And that's how you learned all that shit. And now it's in the Performance Center. You have coaches, obviously, and you have veterans training, but all the guys on the roster have been in the business, 1 year, 2 year, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, whatever. That's a pittance of time, especially when those years have been spent on the independents, where they probably learned more bad habits than they did good things. So OVW was a microcosm of a territory, and it was booked at a territory way with guys given specific positions on the roster, specific whether they're babyface or heel. Are they underneath guys? Are they middle card guys? Are they top guys? There's clear delineation. There's clear upward movement when a guy that's been in the middle suddenly gets a victory or gets thrust into a position where now he's featured in the main events with other guys that have already been in main events, so the fans subliminally understand that this guy is now in this company for a reason We're supposed to take him more seriously if his performances can carry that off. Guys would do angles and programs with each other. They would turn on each other and switch from heel to babyface or babyface to heel, not too often, but when there was a reasoning for it, so that they would have experience in doing all those things and working in different fashions. But everything clearly had a reason, and we weren't using 50 guys at the same time. We were concentrating on a roster of 20 guys that you would have in a territory, and then other people were training and bouncing in and out on the periphery. The Performance Center, which later became NXT, has not necessarily followed that pattern. They've got, and the house shows, they just used to go out and put guys on the card to get them experience working in front of people. Well, if you're getting experience doing something in front of people, but you don't pass taking the bumps and getting them down, you're not really being made to understand how people are booked and moved up and down cards and switched to babyface or heel depending on where they're needed and what their, what style is more natural to them in our eyes. So we want to let them do that. That's different than just being booked against everybody because there's no babyface and heels anymore, and there's no pecking order on the cards, and there's no people being featured in this period of time where other guys are being cooled off or brought up underneath to do later. It's just all out there. I don't know. I guess that's just the new way of doing things, but it doesn't work as good as the old way.
It sounds like Vince may want the priorities to go back to the old way of developmental because, they've developed their own guys. Roman Reigns was their guy. He wasn't working indies or anything, but so much of the priority of NXT was Hunter's indie promotion. Ring of Honor's hot. Indie wrestling's hot. Let's get as many of these guys as we can, and we'll have our own promotion. We won't admit that we're competing with Ring of Honor or trying to hurt them, but that's what we're trying to do. And it worked until AEW. And now all of a sudden they're reassessing everything. Isn't that funny?
Well, and see, here's the thing. You can have the young people's wrestling promotion without having most of the people on the roster the size of young people. I agree with what you said in that they saw that Ring of Honor was hot and the indie style of wrestling was hot at the high level. They would have never looked at the indie style of wrestling that AEW has cannibalized over the past couple of years with just the goofiness or the ultra violence or whatever. But the physical style that guys in Ring of Honor, the Richards and Edwards and Strongs and Coles and O'Reillys and etc., the physical athletic style, that's what they took for NXT with some of those indie names and Ring of Honor names, obviously, that could do that and started going in that direction. But they lost the plot on the fact that you can make a young people's promotion. You can feature more young talent. You can have more young people's music. You can not be the staid old school, old fashioned Monday Night Raw, but you still have to have on a mainstream basis on national television, not an underground or a cult or a niche promotion, but in the mainstream on national network cable or whatever. You need to have personalities that not only look the part, but that can get over verbally and with their charisma instead of just doing the technically great athletic matches that draw 500 or 1,000 people tops to the the indie shows, some of them in a rec center somewhere. And that's not advocating that the personalities and charisma and verbal ability and connection with the audience means they need to go out there and do Saturday Night Live or Monty Python or Benny Hill or whatever. That means that, I'm sorry, OVW was a young people's promotion for young people. We had current music. All the guys were in their 20s, maybe early 30s, a few teenagers sprinkled in. And a lot of the crowd was the same age group because that appealed to them. But we also had the older people, the older fans that liked wrestling because we were still having these young guys that were born in the 80s do the wrestling logic of the 80s, and everything else was up to, and we had the current rock and roll station sponsoring and fucking et cetera, et cetera. It was not old-fashioned old people's wrestling, but it wasn't silly and stupid, and everybody involved in it wasn't the size of a fucking 8th grader. So I just think that's the difference, is you can go too far with everything. They need to impart some more old style values and try to find some people that have the size and the ability and the physical and verbal charisma to be stars, and make sure that they can work, because that's at the base of it, but that's not the be all end all of it. And it doesn't mean that young people's wrestling also has to be silly people's wrestling. I would think a lot of young people would like Walter and Elia if they saw that. And as I said before, as I will close up this subject, Walter and Elia is the kind of professional wrestling we could have had if the showbiz folks and the cosplaying kids didn't take it over instead.